Hi, it's Wednesday, June 25th, and we have two systems active in the Western Pacific today. We have Tropical Storm Sepat nearing the central coast of Japan and will make a very close brush or landfall on the coastline later today or early tomorrow, as a weak system may have some scattered showers and storms that might bring some gusty winds to the region. Other than that, nothing too strong expected out of this one. We've also got Invest 96W in the Western Pacific, or South China Sea to be more specific. This system is developing and may become a tropical storm before coming into southern China in a few days. Now, there's also going to be something we're talking about that's more long range, its potential development this weekend or early next week. And I'll leave a timestamp to that alongside 96W if you want to skip ahead to any part of the video. We are going to be starting off with Sepat briefly. Now, Sepat is not doing too hot this morning, as you can see in the satellite imagery. The naked swirl is continuing north towards the coast of Japan. It did have some decent convection earlier this morning, but it got sheared since down to the south. And the reason for that shear is the trough that we talked about yesterday now coming east into the Sea of Japan. You can see the counterclockwise flow around it as it continues pushing east. And in advance of this trough, because this trough is amplifying a bit, we have now an upper level high pressure system that's also here. So this high is centered over Japan, and Sepat is here. So it's on the eastern edge of this ridge. So there's a little bit of northerly shear. Now, these two features are pushing east, and so eventually Sepat is going to be directly underneath of this, and you can see that flow is fairly light directly underneath of this, and that may allow it to blow up some convection tomorrow morning or late tonight and remain a tropical system before making landfall, or a very close brush at least, with the eastern coast of Japan. You can see that coupling happen here on the HAFS model, a hurricane specialized model. Again, here's that trough, here's that ridge in advance, and you can see it gets coupled directly underneath of that by later today. Now, the thing about the waters here is going to be that they're cooling down. If I go to the sea surface temperature plot, you can see it's reaching the edge of the warm waters. Usually for these systems, you need about 26 degrees Celsius waters, although we do have this little tongue of warmer water extending northeast past Tokyo. So this may allow the system to maintain itself a little better with the lower shear environment, but this is going to be short-lived as this trough is going to continue pushing east. And you can see by later on Wednesday into Thursday, this trough begins to shear the system. And by this point, we'd be seeing the system likely transitioning into a more non-tropical system, and we'd be seeing intensification perhaps as a more non-tropical low, as we don't really see tropical processes occurring this far north once you get north of all the warm water. And that could mean some wind impacts for areas further north of Tokyo along the coast, but again, that's going to be more non-tropical, so we really won't be talking about that one all too much, as I usually focus on tropical systems. But as for the tropical part, this is what it may look like as it comes in early tomorrow morning or late this evening. You can see some bands of scattered showers and storms, and these may have some gusty winds of tropical storm force as they come in and could lead to a bit of a gusty night here in eastern Japan. But in terms of big impacts, we're not expecting that right now, just because of the sea surface temperatures being so cold up here, just given that it is still mid-June. Okay, moving to the South China Sea, we have Invest 96W, and this system is looking pretty healthy, especially in comparison to, say, Pat today. It's likely not a tropical depression just yet. We got an ASCAT pass several hours ago. I didn't pull it up, I should have, but it showed a pretty significant northeasterly flow, or southeasterly flow rather, on the north end of all this convection, but a pretty weak southern side, and it was likely closed, but it's still a fairly weak area of low pressure underneath of this convection. Now, we have seen this more organized burst take shape over the past several hours, and it's likely that we're seeing this center beneath of it start to tighten up and intensify a bit. And so this is likely in the process of becoming a tropical depression or storm. I wouldn't be surprised if, say, this time this evening or tomorrow morning, we have a tropical depression or tropical storm named by the Japan Meteorological Agency. But as of right now, it's still a disturbance. And really, the system is not forecast to intensify all too much. The environment right now is fairly favorable, and you can see this on the HAFS model. You can see the more favorable environment that's in. You can see in these streamlines a little bit more curved. We talked about this a bit yesterday as the GFS was not really showing this all too well because it had been doing poorly with initialization on the system. The half seems to be doing better on it. You can see we have this curvature in the streamlines, and this is as an effect of this convection blowing up, and it's helping to create a lower shear environment. Now, it's not going to be really lasting for too long because we do have a trough digging into central China. You can see this happen if the system continues to track towards the coast. This trough digs in and amplifies. And as this amplifies, we have, similar to what Sepat is dealing with over Japan, this area of high pressure that also begins to amplify and begins to push easterly flow, or northeasterly flow rather, directly onto our storm. And you can see these blues increasing a little bit in coverage directly on top of 96W. And so this shear is likely to inhibit the system for the most part of intensifying all too much, but we'll still likely see the system become a tropical depression or storm. I think we will see that happen. And similar to what we can see with, say, Pat in Japan, it's likely going to be scattered showers and storms, as you can see on this radar depiction of what the radar could look like when the system is coming in. And these bands could have some tropical storm force winds as it comes ashore. But nothing big here expected, just given the wind shear that's expected to be in place, and we'll just be dealing with some gusty winds and heavy rainfall from these storms. Now, after these two systems clear out, we're not going to be done in the Western Pacific, as we seem to be going into a bit of a more active phase in the Western Pacific, the first one really we've seen this year. We've started to see a few days ago the GFS ensemble. This is showing you red numbers being areas of low pressure that are forming, and these orange blobs are showing you where TCs are forming, tropical cyclones. And so on the GFS a few days ago, we started to see this begin to blow up pretty significantly on this map. Now, when the GFS starts to show this, you usually have a little bit of caution because the GFS can often be pretty excited about these things pretty early on, and it can often be too aggressive. But over the past couple of days, we've seen the European really tick up. This is the afternoon or overnight, rather, ensembles from the European, showing a pretty strong signal for something else forming in the tropical Pacific, likely this weekend or early next week. You can see a lot of purples here showing what could be a stronger typhoon coming west here towards Japan, Taiwan, China. Now, something to note about this is that we are looking very long range at this point. We have not even had a disturbance formed, and we're talking about the system forming here in the central tropical Pacific in the weekend time frame to early next week. So don't pay too much attention to the tracks of these systems. This is going to be something that we have to iron out in time, but it does certainly seem likely that we'll see something try to form in the tropical Pacific as we head into early next week, and thereon we could see some threat to land somewhere. Right now, it's not really too sure. Really, if I had to tell you the overall range of locations this could hit, it would range from southern Japan to the Philippines, and this is a massive range that it's just no worthwhile to speculate over where the system could go. Now, overall, the environment for the system developing does look favorable. Now, it does not look like a typical MJO pulse that's causing this to flare up. You can see on the GFS ensemble that we're really right here right now. It comes out a little bit in mid-July on this forecast, but we're really sitting dormant here with the MJO. So what else is causing it? It looks like we have a hot cell, a tropical upper tropospheric trough that's been sitting, or is going to be sitting rather, in the tropical Pacific for several days. And it's partly due to the pattern that's causing Sepat to come north. If we go back to the analysis from overnight, you can see this very strong area of high pressure over the subtropical and northern Pacific. And what this is doing is this is inducing what's called an anticyclonic wave break, where this ridge has now cut off this upper level trough axis further south. And so we have this now Tut cell that's sitting here in the tropical Pacific. And so usually this does shear a lot of the tropical Pacific. So you can see out here, we have a lot of strong westerly flow aloft, not favorable for storms forming way out there in the tropical Pacific. But you can see that we do have some stronger colors here on the south side of this Tut cell. This is divergent flow from further west, that being air rushing away from this zone near the Mariana Island chain. And so if these troughs persist in these areas for long enough, they can begin to induce convective development. And so this is forecast to stay because remember, we do have another ridge that's forecast to form with Sepat coming north. You can see that happen on the GFS ensemble. Here comes this ridge amplifying with this trough. And so now this trough is still sitting here. This Tut cell is still sitting in the tropical Pacific, still feeding all this divergence near the Mariana Island chain. So on the modeling, we start to see a bunch of convection firing here near these islands. And alongside that, this upper low that was likely bringing some shear to this region is now pushed west. So the environment is getting more favorable, and we have this Tut cell just sitting here. So what this induces is rising air across this region, which leads to tropical development eventually on these models. And you can see the effect of this if we look at the zonal wind anomalies from the GFS ensemble. This is showing you the east and west wind components and the anomaly of that. The reds is winds going towards the east, so westerly winds. Purple is winds coming from the east, so easterly wind anomaly. And you can see where we have all that rising air with that Tut cell, we have all this westerly wind rushing into this zone, and then we have all this easterly wind relative to normal. And so you have this belt of cyclonic flow, or counterclockwise flow, that is, in this region. And so where we see tropical development is where all the divergence is, which is around the Mariana Island chain, which is where the GFS and European ensembles are liking to develop this storm. That got a little complex there, but that's the reason why we're seeing development on these models take shape. And this does seem like a pretty good idea from the models. And I mean, when the GFS and European like this are in agreement, that usually is pretty strong confidence that something will begin to form and will likely occur. So, like I said at the beginning of all of this, it's too far out to say for sure what kind of land threat this would have, so we're talking about development this weekend or early next week. But it does seem likely that we'll see something try to form into a tropical system and maybe see our first real attempt at a strong typhoon for the season as we head into next week. And I'll have more videos on this as it does develop throughout the next several days. That's all that I've got for today. Stay safe in Japan and China as our two systems that are active right now come through the next couple of days. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.